Okay, let's get started. Hello and welcome to ForeFlight's Advanced Flight Planning webinar. My name is Angela Anderson, Director of Marketing here at ForeFlight, and I'm your host. Your key presenter is Tyson Weihs, ForeFlight CEO and co-founder. Also joining us is Michael Vogt and Caitlin Galloway. Michael heads up our team who builds all of the detailed aircraft performance profiles used in ForeFlight's powerful flight planning engine, but you're going to hear a lot more about that from Tyson in a little while. Caitlin leads our customer success team and ensures customers have a smooth onboarding experience with all of ForeFlight's capabilities that you're going to hear about in this webinar. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode. However, you can ask questions throughout the presentation using the GoToWebinar message panel. Michael, Caitlin, and I, and perhaps a few others, will be responding back in real time to as many questions as we can during the presentation. This session is being recorded, and we will follow up via email with a link to access it. Access will also be published to the ForeFlight website. So with that, sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. Now over to you, Tyson.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Advanced Flight Planning webinar by ForeFlight. I'm Tyson Weihs, the co-founder and CEO, and I'm looking forward to giving you all a tour of some of the things that we've been working on over the past year or so. This webinar is to really help introduce you to the way that we use ForeFlight practically in our flight operation. We fly 300 plus hours a year, and so that volume of flying has really helped us drive improvements in the product. And there's lots of things that we have added to ForeFlight in the past year, and we want to show you some of those in a quick summary of how we go about planning our flights and trips. And then I'll go into a bit more detail on more of the nuanced things that we've added that you may or may not have picked up on in our newsletters or emails over the past year. So with that, there's a couple of objectives here today. One is, again, to show you those features that we've been working on. We really want you to get comfortable using the advanced features and setting up aircraft to be able to leverage the various things that we've done. And we really want you to get comfortable with filing flight plans in ForeFlight as well. We think that once customers get familiar with these features, they can really improve their day-to-day productivity and get more out of the product. We'll introduce you to some tips and tricks, and I'll also point you to some of the new customer service offerings we have as well for our advanced flight planning customers, and that includes our success team and our file operations team that helps our customers get more out of the product and help out when they hit bumps. So with that, we're going to dive right into the webinar. Again, thanks for joining, and here we go. Historically, flight planning in ForeFlight has started on the map. The map view was one of the first views that we created in the application, and in 2010 or so, we invented the whole notion of touch planning, which was be able to tap on a route line, select a waypoint, and snap to. After that, we introduced a flight planning drawer that allowed you to type in waypoints if you knew your route, like entering your origin or destination. We added these buttons on the side that let you pick an aircraft or select your altitude or do things like selecting your routes in Route Advisor. In the past year, as we've added some of the advanced flight planning features, we've changed these components to allow you to do things like change your cruise profile that you're using for your aircraft. We've enhanced the Route Advisor to show you flight times, fuel burns, trending routes, preferred routes, and if you're a VFR flyer, low altitude airway routing as well. In the past year, though, we've also introduced the new Flights tab, and I want to spend a lot of time on the Flights tab today because it's something that we've upgraded continuously throughout the year. It's a really powerful new addition to ForeFlight that gives you an option to start flight planning from this form-based approach instead of the maps. But I want to spend quite a bit of time today talking about the Flights tab and showing you how we use the Flights tab to plan our flights. I'm going to start with a simple round trip, something that we do very frequently, and that is travel between our Houston office and our Austin office. That's a short leg, so that will introduce some of the power of the flight planning engine's ability to recommend routes and altitudes that are relevant for the type of trip that you're flying. So to start a new flight plan from the Flights tab, you start with the plus button. The plus button is going to add a new entry to the flights bar on the left-hand side, and it's going to populate the form on the right-hand side with the last aircraft that you've used, and is going to wait for you to enter inputs like departure and destination and so on. So flying to Austin, we would leave out of Houston, and here's where you see one of the first improvements that we've made, which is suggested airports. This gets smarter over time as you visit airports or as you run flight plans. And I'm going to select Houston, and then I'm going to type in Austin, because that's going to highlight the search feature that we've built. Austin Executive is our typical destination, so we'll select that. The aircraft that we fly has been pre-selected. In this case, it's the Mustang, and we're starting to see some things appear in this bar on the top that are indicating some changes that we need to make to this flight plan. And the first one is we need to reduce the altitude. So we'll get into how that is dismissed shortly. But I've got our aircraft selection here. We're going to leave it on our max cruise profile. These are our more advanced profiles that have been added in the past year or so. And I'm going to come down to route selection. And this is where things start to get really interesting. So in Route Advisor, I've been given a recommended route, ATC cleared routes, and other information about each of those routes. What types of aircraft they were flown by, the altitude bands that they were flown by, how many times they have been flown, and I'm also getting time, fuel, and distance calculations for each one of these. This also highlights the speed of our advanced flight planning engine, which I refer to as the supercomputer, because it's running all these flight plan calculations for every single one of the options, and that takes a tremendous amount of computing power. So we typically go with the recommended route because the recommended route is incorporating trending routes. It's looking at the aircraft's configuration. It's suggesting RNAV arrivals if you're GPS equipped. It's suggesting VOR routes if that's the navigation equipment that you have aboard the airplane. And it's suggesting altitudes. So as you can see, one of the first hints that I get for this flight from Houston to Austin is that we need to update our planned altitude. And it says you need to update it to flight level 200. So that message that you saw earlier, which says you need to reduce your altitude, the Route Advisor actually helps figure out the right altitude for this particular leg. And between Houston and Austin, it's pretty difficult for a turbojet aircraft to get to altitude. So we recommended the route that is going to be feasible on that short leg and is going to allow for a little bit of cruise time. Something I think that's important to mention is, although I'm using a turbojet aircraft here as an example, we've really built the advanced flight planning functions for all types of aircraft, whether you're in a 172, piston single or twin, turboprop or turbojet. Many of these enhancements that we've made apply to all aircraft and are especially useful for pilots that fly very frequently. So I've selected my route. I've got a SID and a star that it's suggested, and I'm going to continue scrolling through the form. We're going to take 4 people over there today, and it's going to be an average weight of, say, 175, and we've got about 50 pounds of bags. So as you can see, we've added this new payload section that lets you quickly add people and cargo to the airplane and average weights and see what your total aircraft weight looks like. That's going to come in handy when I get down to the weight section, which helps communicate whether or not you've exceeded any of the structural weight limits of the airplane. This fuel section is new here as well, and we're really happy with how this turned out because it helps you do quick scenario planning. This fuel policy line here gives you 5 different fuel policies you can choose. So if you know you want to land with a certain amount of fuel, or you've got a certain amount of gas in the tanks already when you take off and you're not filling up, or you just want to take extra fuel, you can select between any of these fuel policy options. But a recent addition made this fuel policy section a lot smarter, and we've done a few things. One is we've added min and max buttons. So as you can see here in this start line, there is a max button, and if I press that max button, it's going to fill the tanks to the top. And the max fuel that you can put in the airplane is something that's been set up in the aircraft view. So in the event that your airplane can take more fuel than it might have come from the factory, you can adjust that, and that starting fuel will be used here as well. If I know that I had a certain amount of fuel in the airplane, so for example, we fill up the airplane and we only have, say, 2,000 pounds of fuel to begin with, I type in 2,000 pounds of fuel and the flight plan is rerun. So in just under a second there, the flight plan was recalculated, all the metrics were recomputed, and all the weight limits were checked as well. And so this is a really powerful way for you to run through different fuel scenario policies. And that becomes useful if, again, you're taking off with a known amount of fuel in the tanks, or if you're at an airport with expensive fuel and you really want to take the minimum amount of fuel required. So in that event, you just hit the min button, and the system is going to compute the minimum amount of fuel you need with your preferred reserves in order to compute the flight plan. Then as I scroll down, I see the weight sections, and we're good on our weight limits here today for this short flight. Then we've added this destination services section as well here, and this helps you get organized and know what FBO you're planning to arrive at. It gives you some quick action buttons for calling the FBO or sending them a note or getting directions. And if you go into this view, if there's more than one, you'll see all those options listed here. You have access to fuel prices, and if you're using the Jet FuelX system for fuel card management, all that is integrated as well. This fuel order section is new here as well, and that's helpful to give the FBO a heads up. If you know how much fuel you're going to take ahead of time, you can configure that here. If I wanted to leave sort of captain's discretion, I can eliminate the fuel quantity, then send that fuel order, and the FBO is going to get a notification, and then they're going to get an option to respond to that and let you know that they've received your fuel order. We've added this new flight log section as well, and that helps you enter your ending either fuel or flight meter times and your on-off in and out times as well. So here we've done a quick flight from Houston to Austin Executive. Now I have the option to pack that so that I can get the latest charts and maps for that. So I'm going to start packing that flight, let it run in the background. After spending a day in Austin, we're going to come back to Houston, and so I'm going to use this Add Next Flight button here. So I'm going to go ahead and add the next flight. What's nice about this is it's carried over many of the settings that I set on the previous flight. So the aircraft is the same. It knows what airport I'm going to be departing from, and it's carried over the passenger count. So this is a really helpful way if you're doing multiple legs in a day to configure those legs in that whole trip and make adjustments as needed. So coming back home, we're going to select the arrival airport. You see that Houston is already coming up as a suggestion because I went to that earlier. So I'm going to select that. Again, the default altitude for this airplane is too high for such a short route. Go back to Route Advisor, just select the recommended route. That's going to be typically the best option. Update my altitude. We've dropped a couple passengers off in Austin, so we don't need to bring them back with us. And we're going to do a min fuel required flight because the gas in Austin is a bit more expensive than our home base. Check our weight limits, and for the trip home, we're parking at our same hangar, so we're not going to select an FBO or a fuel order here. And again, I can pack this flight as well. So now I've got 2 legs planned for the flight. I'm going to run back and file those and show you some of the benefits of filing with ForeFlight. I'm going to file them for a bit in the future so that we can cancel that as needed. So we'll make the flight time for, let's just say, 3:30 here p.m. When we're ready to file this flight plan, I hit the Proceed to File button. You can see I'm being prompted to copy some changes over. What this means is that I've done something on the flight form, like change the departure time that causes the flight to be out of sync with the flight plan form. So typically you just hit the copy button. It'll copy over any changes that have been made. In this case, I've increased the fuel. And then I just punch the file button here. It tells me that I'll be filing a flight plan. And this is a helpful feature here, which is it tells you how far in the future your flight plan is that you're filing. So in the event that you made a mistake on the departure time, you can catch that here. I'll press the File button. That'll be filed in just a couple of seconds. And once that's filed, I'm going to start getting notifications from the ForeFlight system, like the expected route, and any other changes that pop up along the way. So here you can see the expected route has already come back, and a notification that says the flight plan has been acknowledged by ATC. So we're going to continue to send these sorts of notifications after your flight plan has been filed, so you can keep informed of changes. One of the new notifications we added was expected departure clearance time. So if you do get a delay, you'll get a notification that indicates that as well. So again, the expected route is in here, so you can see whether or not you're filed in your expected match. And in this case, you know you're going to get cleared as filed. If the expected route ended up being different from the filed route, what I would do is then apply this route change to the flight plan, and then I'd refile it. That way I'm going to get cleared as filed when I call for my clearance. Now that I've filed the flight plan, I've gone back to the main flight form, and you can see that this messages tab now has a count on there. That means I've received 6 messages, and you can see the sorts of things that are popping up. And here's one that's interesting, which is an airport runway restriction. So runway 13 and 31 is going to be closed. Well, that's a pretty important one to be notified of. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this flight plan. Since we don't intend to fly it, it's good to clear it out of the system. And just like that, I've planned a flight, filed it, and canceled it. So now that we've gone through that basic introduction of planning this round-trip flight, I'm going to walk through each of the components of the flight planning form and tell you a little bit about each one of those. So to start with, at the top of this flight planning form, now we have this new flight metrics bar. So that's showing you the 5 really important pieces of information that most of us are concerned about when filing a flight plan, like the distance, how much time we plan to spend en route, the estimated time of arrival and local time at the destination, how much flight fuel we need to take this flight, including reserves, and the wind component. This next line down here says calculated 4 minutes ago with a refresh button. What that means is that's how long ago the flight plan was computed. Now, we don't recompute flight plans automatically up to time of departure, so we've added this refresh button here. So in the event you want to rerun the flight plan with the latest weather, so for example, if you've planned a bunch of flights in advance, you can just tap this refresh button, and again you'll see that entire optimized flight plan was rerun in just under a second. Now I'm going to plan a slightly longer flight, and I want to do that so that I can show you some more of the features of the navlog that we've created, as well as what a briefing looks like for a longer flight. So the flight we're going to take is one that we do frequently to see our friends up in Denver at Jeppesen. So I'm going to plan Houston to Centennial Airport. So I know I'm going to need a route going into Centennial. I'm going to select this recommended route. That's usually what we end up getting flying up there. And then we're going to take a look at the navlog here. It's important to point out that every time I do a calculation, the navlog is regenerated. So remember I was pointing out some of the features of the fuel section earlier. If I go down to the fuel section, for instance, and I had just fueled the airplane and we started it up and we saw that the fuel on board was different than we planned, I can really quickly make that change. So let's say they put 2,400 pounds in the airplane. So I'm going to type in 2,400 pounds. And if this was a piston or a twin, it would be gallons, and you could look at the gauges on the airplane and adjust the start fuel appropriately. But I entered that 2,400 pound fuel, and the navlog has already been regenerated. Why that's different than some of the other solutions out there is that you can do this in the airplane. So if your phone or your iPad has cell service, you can adjust the start fuel to equal exactly what's on board the airplane. And that's really helpful when you are using the navlog in flight, because then you can do accurate comparisons on fuel burn as the flight progresses. So this is a habit that I'm in. As soon as we get in the airplane, adjust the fuel. So we set it at 2,400 pounds. I'm going to pull up the navlog here, and I'm going to point to the fuel section first. So you can see I've got a block fuel of 2,400 pounds. Well, that's the beginning fuel that's in the tanks, and my navlog now reflects that. I see the taxi fuel values, flight fuel, the reserve that we've set, the alternate, and the extra fuel that we have available. Here's the route that we just filed, so that's displayed here as well. You see the RAIM checks out, no outages predicted here. In the waypoint list here, we have the waypoints that we've planned, but we also have some synthetic waypoints that we've created as well. So those include the TOC, which is top of climb, TOD, top of descent, as well as waypoints on long direct legs. And we did that so that once you get to top of climb or you're some portion along a long direct leg, you can check winds, temps, cumulative fuel burn, time en route, etc., and make sure that you're on plan. If there's a VOR in your route of flight, we also include the VOR name, the controlling center, and the frequency. And that's helpful because often VORs are named things that don't match up with their three-letter identifier. So here you can see Ranger is fuzz, and if you get clear direct Ranger, that will go ahead. That will be on your nav log for quick reference. We now have these actual time columns, both for fuel and time. So if you do print this out and you want to keep notes throughout your flight, you can do that and write on these in these spaces as well. Here again, you have all the waypoints along your route of flight, and then for each one of those, you have bracketed altitudes for your flight plan. So in this flight plan, we're showing 320, 340, 3638, and 400. So if we did want to descend or climb, we would have the information related to that particular altitude. So it's going to have the wind components, your temperature, as well as your total time, total fuel burn, and your average headwind component along the route. We've added these airport blocks as well, so you can see for your departure and destination, we've got the weather frequencies, tower and CTAF, and the other important frequencies, elevation, and then your longest runway. And then at the bottom, there's just some summary information that recaps some of the elements that are already presented throughout the navlog in one easy to reference area, as well as places to write notes in the event that you print out those navlogs. We found using this in our flight operation is, even though we used to print these navlogs, we're now just keeping them on the iPad, and so we'll pull this up in flight, and that's our reference instead of having to manage paper. So it keeps the cockpit a little clean. So one last thing about the navlog: in the event you set your airplane up with us for data link, a recall number will be printed on the navlog. That's another feature that you may not be aware of, but we do support now uplinking through Satcom Direct and Honeywell systems. So if your airplane does have that capability, we can send those flight plans up to the FMS where you can recall them. Now let's take a look at the new briefing option you've got. So again, this is what we call our professional grade briefing. It takes from the airline world as well as some of the ICAO standards for briefings and gives you some really handy reference pages that are helpful. In this first one, it starts out with this vertical cross-section chart. So again, regardless of the airplane you're flying, this is a great way to see what your flight's going to look like throughout the route of flight. I'm going to highlight some of the things that are on here. First is obviously your vertical profile. So in this case, you can see that ForeFlight has actually suggested a step climb, and that's what creates this jag in the route line there. We've got your wind components for your route of flight, the wind and temperature at altitude, and in this briefing in particular, you can see that there's some turbulence information that's been presented as well. So this is very light turbulence on the EDR scale. If there were icing, you would see that, and you can see that there's a very small tick over here that's indicating icing. And then you can see the terrain profile as well, and then your waypoints along the bottom. The tropopause is listed, so you know if you're going to be in smoother air generally. So again, this is a really helpful cross-section of your flight plan. There's a top-down view of this as well. So here's my route of flight, the wind components, and then again, what does the turbulence situation look like throughout the flight. Significant weather chart, which is helpful. And then METARs and TAFs. One of the things we did just recently, and you can see that here, is we have bolded the section of the TAF that corresponds with your arrival time. So it makes it very easy for you to see what the TAF is going to look like on your departure and arrival. And we've added these color-coded flight category indicators on each component of the TAF that line up with the way that we present flight category information in the app as well. So you can very quickly scan and see what the flight conditions might be at the time of arrival. And scrolling down to the NOTAMs section here, and there's been a lot of attention on NOTAMs recently. We've started color coding the various controlling conditions in the NOTAMs as you see here. So instrument approach procedures out of service, the infamous tower unlit obstruction NOTAM as well. And then this is a nice feature as well, which is we'll show you in the briefing NOTAMs that have been changed, and that's either added or edited within the past 12 hours. So you can very quickly scan to this section and find NOTAMs that have recently been issued or edited. And that's the new briefing. So let me show you how to configure this new briefing. In the More tab under Settings, if you scroll down, you will see the briefing format option. And I've got it set to graphical and PDF option. So again, here's the 3 briefing options that you can choose from. This is probably one of the things that a lot of customers are going to get out of this presentation today is just switching to a briefing format that they might find more preferable. You've got your traditional text format. That's just the giant wall of text that has been around for ages. The graphical HTML briefing, which is something we introduced a couple of years ago, and now you have the graphical PDF briefing. In the departure and destination section, we've made a couple of important enhancements here as well. One is this new PDC bubble here. And this is something we released recently in partnership with Satcom Direct that we're super excited about. At 70 plus airports now that are equipped with the FAA's Tower Data Link service, ForeFlight can now deliver a real clearance, the pre-departure clearance, to your mobile phone. And the way this works is you register your aircraft with us for PDC service, and you can go into your aircraft page on the web. There is a button to enable PDC. Click that. There's some forms to read and fill out because it's important that you understand the way that works and what your responsibilities are when you use PDC. But once you do fly with ForeFlight, about 30 minutes before departure time, you're going to get a text message that includes the departure clearance, and this is what one looks like that we were recently issued, along with your D-ATIS. So you're going to get those 2 things together. And once you start flying with this capability, it's really hard to fly without it. It's something you really miss when you go to the airport and you find yourself having to look up the D-ATIS or call for clearance. With this service, you've got it right on your phone. If you find yourself flying into these larger airports, contact us about getting your aircraft equipped for PDC, and we think you'll love it. And last thing with PDC, if you're a subscriber to the advanced flight planning tier, PDC and D-ATIS are no extra charge. It's included with all the other great features that are available in our advanced flight planning package. We added these 2 info buttons here as well, and those are helpful. You saw earlier with Austin Executive that there's a runway closure issue at our time of destination. If I tap the info button here, I'm going to get a popover with the airport information here. That helps me double check METARs, TAFs, other forecast information, and get access to NOTAMs for a quick check. And as you can see here, there's the runway 1331 closure that's helpful to know about. So in the aircraft section here, we've got obviously the aircraft selection and the performance profile selection. I don't want to spend a little time explaining how to check your configuration because it's really important, especially if you're using the advanced flight planning tier, to make sure your aircraft is set up properly so you get all these benefits that we've been talking about. So going to the aircraft selection here, you can see the edit button. I'm going to tap on that, and that's going to take me into the aircraft setup view. And one of the things I want everyone to check is to make sure this aircraft type is selected properly. And then underneath the performance profile selection, make sure you're seeing the right things here, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. But for customers who have been with us for a long time, last year we released an aircraft database that is tied to the more advanced performance profiles. And it's really important that you go back into your aircraft, check all of them, and make sure you re-enter the aircraft type code, or at least visit this view so that you can tie your aircraft type code to the actual profile of the airplane. So if I wanted to clear out the C510 here, so this is an example where I have maybe had set this up before we had introduced the advanced flight planning capabilities. I want to re-enter this so you can see what that looks like. So this aircraft list now has every ICAO type that we know about from either ICAO documents or looking at the flight plan filing systems globally. And I'm going to start typing Mustang here. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of matches that hit Mustang, and we're looking for the citation Mustang in this particular example. And this blue line is a really important thing to draw your attention to. This blue label here indicates that we have two performance profiles that ForeFlight's aircraft performance engineering and modeling team had actually built. So you want to try to find the profile for your airplane that links it to the advanced profiles. So here I'm going to select performance profiles, and what you're going to see immediately is under this section, two performance profiles are enabled for this airplane. Now tap on this. So with over 500 different aircraft variants, you can be assured that when you're using one of these profiles, you're getting really accurate calculations. And that was one of the things we set out to do with the advanced flight planning capability, is produce the industry's most accurate flight times and fuel burns as fast as possible. And we're doing all that taking into account environmental conditions like temperature and wind aloft, as well as the actual OEM profile data and the weight of the airplane. So I've got max cruise thrust selected here. If I want to see what the details are of this particular configuration, I can tap that view button here. You can see what climb model from the AFM, what cruise model, etc., are actually being used in this setting. And if I needed to make adjustments to the fuel flow or the speed, I could do that very easily with these slider buttons here. One of the things you might see in your aircraft setup is that you have a basic profile configured down here. So I'm going to add one real quick so you know what that looks like. I'm just going to enter in a cruise speed here for the airplane, and a burn per hour, we're just going to say 900. And I'm going to save that. So now you can see I've got this basic profile configured. Well, that's a very primitive profile relative to what we have now. And the best way to correct that is, once you're set up for the advanced flight planning package, just swipe to delete this, and it's going to disappear and not be used in any flight planning calculations in the future. So I can't stress how important it is for you to run through your aircraft lists, check these configurations, associate them with the right aircraft code, and then remove those basic profiles, because we use this profile throughout the application and in some of our new products and features like Trip Assistant. So it's really important to get that right. So on aircraft setup, you notice that I made these changes from the aircraft row in the flights view, but we also have the aircraft view under the More tab, which many of you are familiar with. I wanted to point out how you go about creating a new airplane and linking it to the performance profile, and I want to say a little bit about ICAO or FAA codes for filing, because those are important things to be aware of and configure when you're setting up a new airplane. And there's some things we do to really help you with that also. So if you tap the plus button, you're going to get a view for a new airplane, and so you're going to set one up here. Let's do in 544 Juliet Bravo. You can see I've got a yellow indication on the aircraft type, so it wants me to select one. I'm going to select that aircraft, C510. I can see it has performance profiles. I'm going to select that. The performance profiles have been added. And then I'm going to scroll down to equipment codes. One of the things you see right now is that there are no equipment codes filled out for this airplane. So 3 minutes after you create an airplane, our system will actually search for other similar aircraft and update these aircraft codes for you automatically. It's magic. So when you add a new airplane, I would say wait a few minutes, see if those filing codes are filled in. You're going to get an email from us. If you don't get one, however, come back here and configure those ICAO codes. So I've already set this plane up earlier. So here's the one that I actually did set up. And you can see that the equipment codes are already set up for this airplane. I did not type any of those in. The ForeFlight system automatically looked up the right codes for this airplane from our aircraft library and applied them here. So that's a real help in reducing the amount of setup work you need to do to file a flight plan. Now, if you run into any issues setting up your ICAO equipment codes, and we are emphasizing set up ICAO, the FAA filing form is deprecated, so they're going to remove that at some point. So you really want to make sure you've got your ICAO equipment codes set up correctly and that you've switched to using the ICAO flight planning form. So a note on the ICAO flight planning form, if I go back to flights and I go to this proceed to file button, you can see the form type selection up at the top here. It says ICAO. Yours might say FAA NAS, and that's where it's important for you to tap on this field and select the ICAO filing form, which will give you access to a wider range of filing options within the US. Now, if you have any issues with switching your flight plans to ICAO or setting up the right ICAO codes for your aircraft, we'll provide you the contact information for our success team, and they'll be able to help you out if you need it. So the route advisor, which I showed earlier, we've made some enhancements to that as well that give you more configurability over the route selections that are provided to you. And you can see this new filter button up top. So when I tap on this filter button, I can now constrain the minimum and maximum altitude of a flight. So for example, on the short flight from Houston to Austin, if I didn't want to go into the flight levels, I could say, well, let's just constrain this flight at 18,000 feet. And you can see that the route advisor is rerunning, and I'm getting now altitude selections that honor this constraint that I've applied. So we look forward to expanding that with other things that you might be able to apply to routes, like maybe avoiding water if you're flying in a piston airplane long distance. So now you can see that I've got this FL180 suggestion from the route advisor. When I select that, I'm going to get prompted to update the altitude of my flight plan. I update that, and now I've got a flight plan that's been capped at 18,000 feet. So when I use this in the piston airplane as well. I'll cap the altitude at 12,000 feet so I avoid oxygen levels, and that ensures that I'm always getting routings that are up to altitudes that I am happy with. The altitude advisor wasn't something that I showed earlier, but this again is giving you flight plan computations at every single altitude option for the airplane, giving you headwind component, what the total flight plan time is, and the fuel as well. Again, this helps highlight the speed and the intelligence of the engine. We've computed flight plans for every single one of these altitudes very quickly, and not included flight plans that are above the altitude that the airplane can reach on this particular leg. So you can see in this case, flight plans above flight level 280 are excluded because the plane can only get to 260 for this short leg. On the fuel selection, again, I showed you the fuel policy options there as well. These toggles on the left-hand side will, if you expand them, allow you to see the fuel components for your flight plan. So if, for example, 85, which is the default taxi fuel for this airplane, was low or high, I could very quickly make an edit to that and rerun that flight plan. Down in this weight section, earlier I ran a flight plan that didn't exceed any of the weight limits of the airplane. So let's go ahead and break that quickly, and we're going to try to put 10 people on this airplane. The airplane only has 4 seats in the back, so that's not feasible. And you can see that we've exceeded the payload of the airplane, and you can see the errors shown on the weight limit section. So this is reporting that I am 471 pounds over the zero fuel weight of the airplane, and that's a correction we need to make. So I'll put that back to something that works, and it will recompute the flight plan and clear the error. Now, once we've landed in Austin, we like to keep track of how much fuel we actually burn. So when we shut down the airplane, we've got this fuel at shutdown field now. And so we'll say we ended with 560 pounds. And then we'll come in here and we'll update the flight times for the airplane as well. So we'll update the Hobbs meter, maybe it's 150 hours. And if I wanted to track my in-out, on and off times, I can do that as well. That's helpful for professional pilots that are needing to keep track of that information. So that's a bit more about some of the details on the flight form. Next, I want to spend a little time talking about Trip Assistant. Now, with all this flying we've been doing, one of the challenges we have getting around the country is figuring out when we need to leave to get somewhere. So I'm going to show you around Trip Assistant. It's something that pilots can use, non-pilots can use it, our team of executive assistants use it, our spouses use it, and non-pilots can really use this as a tool to help quickly get answers to those sorts of questions. There's often, even in a flight department, lots of back and forth between the pilot and the schedulers around what's feasible. So here we go. We're going to do a flight from our Houston office up to our Portland office and see Trip Assistant come to life here. So it starts with where am I leaving from? And we're going to say ForeFlight Houston. So the system's going to look up that address, and here it's found our address, and it's found the closest airport to our office. It's giving us drive time distances from this address that I input to the airport, the distance in drive miles, maximum runway length, and some of this capabilities of the airport. So with that, we've selected a departure airport, and we're going to enter Portland. Ooh, next field here. ForeFlight Portland. And you can see here I left off a D, and it found the address, so Fore Canal Plaza here in our Portland main office. It's found the nearest airport there and given me a distance as well. So if I scroll down, I can see where the airport is relative to the departure point or the address point, and total flight time has been computed, or total trip time has been computed between that departure address and the destination. Now, Portland's a pretty long trip, and that's going to require fuel stops. So in order for us to efficiently plan this trip out, we built this new utility called Fuel Stop Advisor, and that's what you're seeing in front of me here. So Fuel Stop Advisor, in just a couple of seconds, has prepared 5 different route options for us to get up to Portland. And it's organized those by the minimum cost of that trip. And so I can tap on each one of these or click on each one of these, and you can see what the trip looks like. Now, there's refinements I can make to the airport selection, and that's going to adjust the stops that are being suggested. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top here, and you can see this airport filter option up here. We've got options for towered, for ILS, for an RNAV or localizer, and maybe we want a towered airport. So I'm going to click the towered button, and you're going to see not only the airport suggestions at the departure and the destination change, and both Hobby here and Portland are towered airports, but now you're going to see the Fuel Stop Advisor has changed as well. So this is actually the trip that we typically make, stopping in Millington, Tennessee. So I'm going to go ahead and select that option. And those stops now have been automatically added to me to this trip in the stop section. You can further filter the stops you want to take by these other options like time and distance. So maybe you don't want to fly any leg over 2 or 3 hours. So if I put 2 hours in here, it's going to recompute stop options that ensure that I have no flights, no legs longer than 2 hours. So now I'm going to have to make multiple stops since I've inputted that constraint. So again, we're going to select an option, and those 2 stops have been added down here. Can remove those, and again, Trip Assistant will recalculate all of the trip times. In this trip details view down here, we've got the departure time, we've got the drive time, the stay time at each stop. So you can, if you need longer to prepare the plane or you need a bit longer to refuel, you can adjust all these stay times. You've got your total flight times and your drive times and the total trip time. So it tells you what time you need to leave to, or it tells you how long the trip will take given a certain departure time. Now, if we wanted to arrive at a certain time, I'll scroll back up to the top here and point out this depart at and arrive by control. And if I select arrive by, Trip Assistant is going to enter a mode where it tries to figure out what time you need to depart to arrive at a certain time. So let's say we want to make it for a dinner appointment. So I'm going to put in 6 p.m., hit the enter key, and Trip Assistant has started doing work, adjusting the fuel stops, and here's what it's telling me now. To make it to Portland by 6 o'clock p.m., we need to leave the ForeFlight Houston office at 8:31 a.m. Now once this is done, you can save this, you can delete these, and in the future you'll be able to share these Trip Assistant calculations with others. So again, Trip Assistant is included in your ForeFlight Performance subscription. It takes advantage of the more advanced ForeFlight profiles. It's important that you do go back and configure your airplane with those advanced profiles, because Trip Assistant does require use of the OEM profile data in order to make its calculations. So just like that, you're able to do really complex flight planning, and under the hood there's a lot of work going on by the supercomputer to run these different flight planning calculations and ensure that every leg is optimized for your airplane using the more advanced aircraft profiles. So that's Trip Assistant. You can log in and give it a try. If you're not using Trip Assistant today or don't have it available in your plan, again, send us an email. We'll get you set up with that so you can give it a try and see if it works for you. So that wraps this portion of the Advanced Flight Planning webinar. I hope you learned something new today. We've been spending a lot of time improving the flight planning products, introducing products like Trip Assistant, and we hope you find those help you in your everyday flying. If you have any feedback for us on the webinar, want to see more or fewer of these, let us know, and we'll be on frequency.
Thank you, Tyson. That was a lot of great information. Did you guys get all of that? Well, not to worry if you didn't, because we're going to send you an email with a link to the recording. Thank you also to everyone for all the great questions. If you didn't receive a response during the webinar in your chat window, please keep an eye out in your inbox. We're going to be responding to all the remaining questions over email. If you liked what you saw here today and you'd like to give ForeFlight's advanced flight planning features a try, reach out to us at sales@foreflight.com. We also encourage existing performance tier customers to set up an orientation call with the customer success team to ensure you're getting the most out of ForeFlight. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the air.